Got a question from Shyam asking how to keep it casual when you are selling to other businesses or enterprises. So, the benefit of keeping it casual is basically that the more formality you add to a meeting, the more it puts people into a sales and negotiation mindset, which causes them to be on guard and defensive about what they say because they don't want what they say to reveal stuff like pricing signals that's then going to get used against them during negotiations. So keeping it casual is partly to avoid those biases that come from formality, avoid the defensiveness, avoid the negotiation symptoms. The other benefit of keeping it casual is that, especially early on, you're often not talking to quite the right person. It takes a while to dial in exactly what your customer segment is and who the initial customer profile that's really going to care a lot and be excited to have these conversations and who you really want to be listening to and the level of depth that's going to drive your choices around your first version of your product. So if you set up a formal like hour-long meeting or 30-minute meeting, it's very common that like 5 minutes in, you realize that you're sort of talking to kind of the wrong person and that they don't really care. And it puts you in a somewhat awkward situation. And it kind of wastes a lot of the work that you did to set up the meeting in the first place. So if it's possible to have the early conversations in a more casual way, obviously there's a limit to this. Like sometimes you need to create a certain amount of formality to get certain conversations to happen in the first place. But insofar as it is possible, uh, getting it as casual as possible will both save you time during the meeting and in the setup of the meeting, and it will reduce these potential biases. Now, there is understandably a challenge to doing this in a business context. Like, how do you set up a casual conversation with a professional person? Well, it helps a lot if you can go through existing warm networks with people who are connected enough to you that they're kind of willing to answer your weird questions for 10 minutes as a favor. This is how I like to do the early learning. Like if you're in university, check out the research sponsors of your professors. Check out the companies that actively run internship programs and recruit from your universities because they'll be happy to do it as like a relationship builder with a smart student. If you're in a startup accelerator, like think about all of the professional experience of the other entrepreneurs. Like it's usually not that many jumps from people to get to someone who's like, oh yeah, I'll answer your questions for 10 minutes. Now, you're not always going to stay there, right? Like, as you mentioned in your question, you need to learn all this workflow stuff before you're able to make a credible attempt at knowing what a promise is. Well, like, that's a perfect justification for why it's beneficial to keep these things casual at the beginning. Because if you set up a formal, let's say like you do an amazing cold email, you do an amazing justification of why it's worth their time, they agree to this like 30-minute Zoom call with you or whatever. And you sit down, you're sort of like, so just like talk me through like the fundamental workflows of your business. They're sort of like, whoa, this person is like, this is kind of basic information. Like, what's in it for me out of this conversation? It's a bit awkward sometimes. People want to have the conversations where they're sharing their personal expertise, their personal experience, their personal frustrations. Talking you through just like the basics of the industry is more tedious than that, right? So that's something that you either call in as a favor from people who want to do it, or if you can, in many cases, you want to separate customer understanding from facts about the world. If it's a basic like workflow of the industry, and it's not how the customer feels about it, or like where they're frustrated by it, or what's annoying about it, it's just like what's the basic foundational like facts about the industry that you do is market research. Like that's really good research task to send agents out on. And they come back and you're like, okay, these are the basics of the industry. That's not the same thing as customer understanding, but it is the foundational layer. And it's really helpful to get that out of the way. You can do it super quickly. The agents are so good at this right now. And you can get like all these just facts about the industry kind of knocked off. Occasionally, there's what I call secrets about the industry that you really need from a friendly industry insider. But let's ignore that for now. So you get your facts about the industry. That's like an hour with an agent. It's super fast now. It's great. And then when you're talking to people, start with the friendly first contact so you can kind of like don't need to make a big excuse for. You've already got your foundational basically facts about the industry. You can start asking them more of these like worldview and questions, the why behind the workflows, or you know the basics. So when you ask, you're asking about the nuance and the exceptions and the edge cases and the subtleties, which is a more interesting conversation for them to have because now they're flexing their expertise and they're telling you something that you couldn't just Google. You don't really want to ask people in person stuff that you could have Googled because then they're like, why are you wasting my time like this? So like Google what you can and then ask them the layer above that, which is like the worldview, the decision making, the why not, all that stuff. And then what happens is like the more you fill in your foundation of understanding, the more credibly you're able to have conversations with strangers. And so like pretty rapidly as you fill in your foundation of understanding, like you're dialed in enough, you know enough about the industry, you know enough about like how these customers kind of think and what they're kind of frustrated by. And then you're able to have longer, deeper, more credible conversations around more specialized topics as you go. And this is kind of the progression. And eventually that's in a place where you're able to start credibly talking about solutions because it built up very step by step. But you don't rush full into like these lengthy kind of formal conversations from scratch because you just don't have the foundation. So you build it up in layers, and just the way it works is like it tends to be easiest to do the early layers as casually as you can. And like as your knowledge gets more sophisticated, you can also start layering in more formality, which gives you access to longer conversations with customers who are further outside of your existing network, which obviously is like important at some point, so that you can fill in the rest of the learning and begin transitioning into to sales or pilot projects or any other sort of customer onboarding. All right, hope that helps. But I guess my final note on this is like the people who run businesses are still people. And people feel most comfortable like talking about their lives and stuff in a casual context. It's weird to be formally interviewed where someone's asking you for all these stories about, your life or your work or whatever. People feel like they don't like being on the receiving end of a survey like that. They're like, eh. But that's what they do in their free time every time they hang out with their friends. Right. So it's like the business context can be serious, but the conversation is still like two humans talking about their lives, So don't get too hung up on the formality. It's still people talking to people. And if you've got a friend who you sometimes swap stories with, you already have this skill. It's just figuring out how to get into a conversation with like a business customer, which still allows you to talk to them like a human. But you build it up in layers, and as you get more credible, it's easier to pull off.